by my colleague Kat Covell.
Hey there.
Welcome to today's Tech Talks, where we're talking all about all those layers that exist in v 2 software: value layers, fade layers, delay layers, effect layers, output layers. So much stuff, so much information. Sometimes it's confusing. Remember, these Tech Talks, you're free to ask any questions you want about v 2 software. Post your questions while I'm talking. We always have a kickoff topic, so the kickoff topic today is about the layers, but you're free to ask any questions you want. Kat is actually sitting there answering the questions, so if you have a question along the way, just type it in there. She might respond via typing back to you, or we'll get to the question when I'm done talking about layers. Additionally, thank you for the feedback. It's a big help. You'll get another survey today at the end of the webinar. I know the big question is, do we record these things? Yes, we do. We will not always post them, however, but this week we're going to likely post the if key Tech Talks that we did last Thursday. Another feedback that you guys put in was you'd like to see my face on camera. Well, we're trying to figure out how to get my face and screen sharing at the same time and record it. Oddly enough, technology is awesome and confusing at the same time. For some reason, it doesn't record the webcam. It only records the screen sharing. So we have some options that we've already looked up. We just need some time to test it out and get it to work. So for right now, you're just getting the screen sharing, and unfortunately, I can't promise that every Tech Talks will be posted, but keep an eye on YouTube, where we'll post the ones that we can post. All right, so let's get started. What you're looking at right now is screen 2, where I've drawn a whole bunch of fixture sheets. And if you're not familiar with this bar at the bottom of your fixture sheet, it's known as the layer control bar. That's what allows you to look at your different layers. Now, the reason I laid out a bunch of fixture sheets here is that I want to point out that the fixture sheet kind of just looks like a spreadsheet. You guys have probably used Microsoft Excel or Google Spreadsheets, and think of each layer of data as a different spreadsheet in the system, and you have an attribute. So we have alpha spot 101 and the dimmer attribute, and that value layer is the physical value of the fixture with a range of 0 to 100%, which gets translated in the background to DMX 0 to 255. And then the next sheet you have in line is a fade value associated with that value 0 to 100%. There's a fade time, which right now is showing as seconds, so 3 seconds. Then there's a delay. How long does that value of full wait before it starts moving? You have an option to show values only as opposed to preset reference, which we'll get into. There's also a whole effect layer, a waveform, low-high values that manipulate what that attribute is doing. As you'll see here, there are no effect parameters on that value right now, but we will see that as well. And then you have the output layers, which we'll jump into. I'm going to go to a bigger fixture sheet so you can see this layer control bar at the bottom. Sometimes people have never seen that before, or it doesn't appear on their fixture sheet, and that's simply based on the yellow ball on the top left of any sheet, or the fixture sheet in this case, is where you set up options associated with your fixture sheet. And if you go to Tools tab, you'll see there's this thing called Layer Control. And when you turn it off, you see no Layer Control bar. When you turn it on, you do see it. I have a tendency to like to leave it on because I like to toggle between my effects layers, my value layers, my fade, output layers. And you'll notice the same exists down here on your encoder bar, which I'll talk about. Right now, I'm changing the layer of the encoder bar, but it's not changing my sheet, and that's because of this auto button. So if we enable auto, that means is as I toggle my encoders, the fixture sheet changes as well. And as I toggle on my sheet, my encoders are changing. So many times people will have auto enabled. In this case, because I have all these fixture sheets drawn at once, I'm not going to have auto enabled because I'm showing sheets with a specific purpose. So let's look at my first queue list here. You'll notice hard values, 3 seconds, 0 seconds for delay. It's kind of a dimmed out value. So I'm going to select a new executor. So I say select executor 1.1. I'm off all the pages. So I say off page through. We're going to select AlphaSpot 101. And you notice I have some presets over here. So we normally use presets for our attributes. In this case, it's dimmer. We'll go to full. And we're going to store that as the first queue. So I just say store please, which goes to my selected executor, which is executor 1.1, and I will hit go. So the first thing I want to point out is what's the difference when you're looking at the value layer? What's the difference between the values button and the values only? Pretty apparent right here. When you're on values, it actually tells you the preset that it's referencing, preset type 1 or dimmer pool 1. And preset 1. If in my second queue, I go to the second preset, we'll create second queue, and we hit go, you'll notice it's referencing preset 1.2. Down here with the values button, I'm just looking at the actual value that's outputting, so it's not giving me the preset name. If I rename this preset, this is called off, so that preset is called off. You'll notice the name shows up there. There's actually an option for what gets displayed related to presets. Once again, yellow ball. If we go to display, preset readout can be numbers and names, so that's why I get 1.2 plus the name of the preset. I could change that to just the name, so I just see the name of the preset without the identifying number, and I could just see numbers, so 1.2, but no name. I have a tendency to do both. I like numbers and names. Okay. Now, if we look at if we go back here, Q1, we'll notice this dimmer value is fading over 3 seconds. And I can see that in this fixture sheet looking at the fade layer that it should take 3 seconds for this dimmer value to fade, and it should have no delay associated with it. But where does it get these values? I can tell because they're dimmed out that it's actually getting, it's not hard stored into the queue, it's pulling that information from the queue itself. So if I look at Q1 and I change this to 5 seconds, you'll notice on the fade layer it now says 5 seconds. And if I look at Q1 again and I go over here to the delay field and I say 2, you'll notice that the delay shows up as 2 seconds because it's dimmed out. I'm going to use fixture 102 as the next example to discuss fade and delay. So on my encoders, I see that the value is at 100%. If I go to fade and I type in 10 seconds, I want this one fixture not to have a 5-second fade, which is what the main queue says in the queue list. I want it to be its own independent fade value of 10 seconds. I go to fade layer, open the calculator, type in 10. You'll notice it follows the same rules as value. It's active red background. And you get these little markers, active information, it's referencing a preset, and green means that it's got its own fade value. Okay, we'll store that as the next queue, and which was Q3. So now fixture 102 is going to take 10 seconds, and you notice it has a bright value. So if I look at the queue, the fade is only 3 seconds, but I've physically stored a fade value on the fade layer of 10 seconds. So it's overriding what the queue is telling it to do, but you'll notice it's still pulling the delay from the actual queue because it's indicated by the grayed out value. Okay, now some people do kind of, they want everything to be, maybe these next 3 lights are supposed to fade up to 100%, but you want it to wipe from the first fixture to the last fixture. They're all going to be 3 seconds, which is what the queue is telling it to do, but in this case I want a range of delay. So I go to my delay, it's value layers 100% for all 4 of those fixtures. I go to delay, I open the calculator, I can say 0 through 5. And now you'll notice that it automatically applies a range of delay to my current selection. 0 through 5 means the first selected fixture is 0, second delay, the last selected is 5 seconds, and it distributes evenly in between. Active information means it gets stored, so we store this as our next queue. And when I hit go, you'll notice this, which is showing the value layer, just shows you that it's referencing a preset. But you'll notice down here where it says values only, you actually see that fading up. So if I do that again, you can watch here the benefit of the values only layer of the fixture sheet is that you can actually watch the values fading as opposed to just seeing the preset name up here. So I use this values only button a lot with the fixture sheet so I can really see what my values are doing. Okay. Hopefully that clarifies a little bit about the value layer button in the fixture sheet and the 4 layers that are associated with that, whether you're seeing just the value layer, which will show preset names if the value is referencing a preset. Now keep in mind, we're going to put this at 50. Store that as the next queue. You'll notice fixture 107, since it's not actually referencing a preset, doesn't show a name, it just shows the value. Whereas values only shows values all the time, no matter what. Now we talk about the effects layer. Maybe all of these fixtures that you have now are supposed to be doing a dimmer sign effect. So choose dimmer sign. I'm going to go to my main sheet here, and we can see from these output symbols that the sine wave is running. Maybe I see this happening, but I don't know why. It could be a cue lift, the chaser that's running, or it could be the effect layer, and that's where the effect layer becomes handy because, oh, now I can see that I have some active information. There's a sine wave applied to the dimmer attribute. We do an attribute-based effects engine, so we actually apply the waveform to the attribute, and then I can see all the effect parameters. So for example, it's all 6 BPM, the low value is 0, the high value is 100, phasing, this is how these are distributed across the waveform. You have the width. You can add actual fade and delay times for fading, independent fade and delay times for effects. So the effect has an independent time, the same as here where we did with values. The effect layer has individual fade and delay. Attack and decay ID as well tells you that this is referencing effect ID number 9. If I store that as the next queue, I'll go back to all my fixture sheets here. You'll see there's no, I'm looking at the effect layer, the form. When I hit go, now I can see, oh, it's referencing, it's got a sine wave on it, and you see how it's very bright value. That indicates that it's hard stored to the queue. Okay, we could see the speed, low, high. Now, interestingly enough, if you take what you understand about spreadsheets, I could actually right-click and change this if you wanted to. That's one fixture at a time. I could select all of these and right-click and change the value. Now notice this is in the programmer. So of course we have to update the queue. It's queue number 6. We'll come back here and you'll see now it's at 8 BPM. So, it depends on if you're at a console, if you're like me with on PC and I'm trying to make changes to this stuff. This layer control bar is immensely helpful for understanding what's going on with your fixtures. Get a lot of situations where people see this, they have these lights chasing on stage, they have no idea why. and I usually have them go through the different layers. Okay, effects layers. Okay, I see there's a sine wave there. Now the last one that's really useful in my opinion is output layers, because that's your real troubleshooting tool. It goes back to, I have a situation like this where I see these lights fading, but I don't understand what's controlling it. And when we go to output layers, we see what's actually outputting. Now output is going to be after the programmer and after the executors, but before the DMX layer. So if you have values parked on the DMX layer, you'd still see them moving in the output layer. This is another place I go just to kind of really see what I've programmed. An even better option over here is just DMX. This is actually viewing the DMX values in a fixture sheet. So you guys have probably seen this view, DMX sheet. This is the real troubleshooting tool, what's actually coming out of your system, but it's not very easy to understand, you know, where these are associated because you don't see IDs or anything. You can always mouse over and you can see, oh, this is on the bottom left, you'd see alpha spot number 5, it's the dimmer attribute, whereas this is alpha spot number 5, the animation wheel. Keep in mind there's a nice button up here that you could say show IDs, so I could see alpha spot 105. I can even show the attribute names. Remember, this is in the yellow ball. Title buttons that show attribute, show additional is what it's called. If it's not there, come into the yellow ball, go to title bar, show additional information, and if you reduce your column count, the nice thing is you can read those attributes a lot easier. If you want this DMX sheet displayed in a nice, easy to read fixture sheet, which is probably what you're used to looking at most of the time, that's what this DMX layer is. Now the additional buttons that are here show you what's actually controlling those attributes, what executor is controlling those attributes, what executor is controlling that effect. So remember, if we go back to value layers, we have values, we have effect layer. So on the output layer, we separate it as well. What's controlling the value? What's controlling the effect? Well, we didn't hard store any values into this queue, so I don't see anything there. But if I back up into Q1, we'll notice executor 1.1 is controlling that value. Hit go, executor 1.1 is still controlling it. It goes magenta to indicate that executor 1.1 is controlling this attribute, but it's a tracked value, whereas 102 is actually hard stored in Q3. We keep going, it starts adding, and then if I'm ever wondering what executor is running this effect, I can go to effect executor ID and I can see, oh, executor 1.1 is running that effect. If I go over here and I start my other executor 30, let's see what we see here. Executor 1.30 is controlling the values, but executor 1.1 is controlling the effect that's running on those. So this happens a lot because we have multiple executors. You might have hit go on executor 1.30, but 1.30 was not set up to stomp your dimmer values. So you still have the effect running, and maybe you're trying to troubleshoot why. I can go to my output layer, go to effect executor ID, see that 1.1 is controlling it, and in that case, if this is a regular occurrence that I go from 1.1 to 1.30, I might enable auto stomp or store some stomp values into the executor. Let's see if this works since we're here. Auto stomp. So now if I go back to Q4, we'll notice the dimmer effect that was running on these 4 lights is auto stomped, so there is no executor running an effect, so I don't see anything. If I go to value layer, I can see 1.30 has control of everything. And then you found the executor, but you don't know what queue has control of the attribute. And this is where you go to value queue ID. Okay, so it's sequence 100. You'll notice on the top right, sequence 100, and queue number 1. If I turn off this mask, we look at some other attributes, you'll see RGB is being controlled by Q4 in sequence 100, which is executor 1.30. And if I go back to running my effect, the effect executor is 1.1. The queue that's telling that effect to run is Q6 on sequence 1, which sequence 1, as indicated by the number on the top right, is assigned to executor 1.1. Oh yeah, a lot of information, a lot of layers here.
We've also had a lot of latecomers to the webinar here, so just as a reminder to anyone who's just joining us, that if you have any questions, whether it be about our layers here or anything else Layers MA2 related, please shoot them over. I'll either be answering them or will be a little bit later on.
So hopefully you guys are a little clear about what all the layers are. One of the interesting ones that I talked about is this output layers. I think this is really important for troubleshooting and understanding what's controlling your data. We actually have a nice bulletin about it. Hopefully you guys are visiting aclighting.com. Under the support tab, we have bulletins. We go to MA2 and what's controlling my fixture attributes? There's a nice bulletin here that actually runs through the specifics of the output layers, where I talk about determining if something is parked, is the blue indicator. If it's in the DMX tester, it's in white. If another user in your session has control of a value, it'll show up as gray, whereas if your programmer has control of a value, it'll show up in red. And then I also talk about the value exec ID and the value queue ID to figure out what executor and what queue / sequence is controlling that value. So this is a really nice bulletin. And remember, if you want to get notified when we post new bulletins, it's aclighting.com/webinars. The support material, you would actually check this box and the associated product bulletins that you want to hear about. If you're already signed up for this list, just look at you can either fill out this form again and it'll automatically update your preferences, or on the next email there's a button at the bottom, there's a link at the bottom of the email that will give you an option to update your preferences. Okay, so if there's questions, please send them right now. I'm happy to answer anything. It doesn't have to be about layers and timing or anything about the software.
All right, so we have a pretty good one, and it is all about those layers. Is there an easy way to apply a fade or a delay for a fixture for all of its attributes?
You want to apply it to every single attribute. Yes, that's actually I covered this button in a different webinar, oddly enough, but it's a good one. I'm going to go back to the value layers. So what are we doing here? We will do some, where did I put these up? Drummers. So let's see, singer on the drums in red with the gobo, and show me focus. No, let's say it's those three. Let's say you wanted to apply an individual fade to all of those attributes. Well, when you go to the fade layer, you have this link button. A link is when you type in a fade value, does it apply to the single attribute, the feature, or all, and does it only apply to attributes that currently have active information on the value layer, or does it apply to everything regardless of activation? So if I start with link single and I put in 5 seconds for red, it's only 5 seconds for red. What makes more sense with color would be to link feature. So when I put in 4 seconds for red, it applies to RGB, amber, white, if that fixture had that, but this whole feature. Notice it doesn't apply to color 1 because color 1 is in a different feature. And then if we go back to layers, let's see if we say active only. Make that magenta. Go to fade. I particularly like link all active because the fade value that I type in, say 6, only applies to those attributes that already have existing active value information. And if I say just link all and type in 10, notice it's all attributes get a fade value, even though they don't all have active value information. In this case, if you try to store this, I'm pretty sure that since you're not storing a value, the fade will not get stored. But this can be useful if you already have a value in a queue and you're trying to add fade and individual fade information to it. And my last favorite one is link filter. If you guys have never used the filter pool, it's a great way to limit what attributes get stored, how it applies. So when I do link filter, please, I'm just going to activate everything on the value layer. I go to fade. I might choose link filter active. My filter only gives me access to dimmer, pan, and tilt. So I can open the calculator and type in 5. I didn't call the filter. This is why we have handy oops function. I got to click on the filter to call it, so it has a green line. And then I could type in 10, and you'll notice on the fade layer, the 10 seconds only applies to dimmer and pan tilt because my filter says only apply to dimmer, pan, tilt. Hopefully that answers your question. If I wasn't clear enough, write another question.
All right. Little flashback to last week. How do you get an if command on the command wing?
An if command on the command wing? The on-PC command wing, I think you're asking about, has an if key on it. Just the same. It's right there on the command wing. I don't really understand that question.
No, I thought it was just a good time to talk about how the software is the same, no matter what you do, whether you're on the full size, whether you're on PC.
Yeah, if you have a fader wing, then you would use the on-screen buttons. You could hit if, or you create a macro. Macros are there for a reason. So a macro could be if output at, which acts just like the if key. So say if output. Notice when I hit if, it puts if output in the command line. The reason I put at that at symbol in the macro is that it inserts all the text before the at symbol, and then when it sees the at symbol, it waits for more input. So it basically recreates the function of that if key.
Awesome. All right, here's one from Supportland, actually, that I've seen a few times here. How do I put a queue in between two queues? I've seen this one come up a couple times.
So, got a queue list here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If you want to put a queue in between, you have to start using decimals. So if this was, I have active information, if I want this to be queue 1.5, I would store queue 1.5. I could say please, it goes to my selected executor, or I could tap on an executor button and it goes there. And you have the option of queue only. That would values that we're tracking from Q1 into Q2. If you want to preserve the status of Q2, I would say Q only, because then it just inserts the new information into Q1.5, and the new information you add to Q1.5 doesn't affect any following queues. On the other side, if you want to allow new information to track forward, you would leave Queue Only turned off. And when in doubt, you can just use the handy tracking shield feature where we preserve the look of any fixtures that are on. Therefore, the new information you put in does not affect any fixtures that are already on in the following queues. Pretty cool. So I'd hit OK, and now if I see my queue list, I have 1.5. And decimal places go out to thousandths. So I could actually store Q 1.00. No, let's see something else. 124. And now I have Q 124. So you can have, what, 1,000 queues in between two main queues.
All right. I'm trying to think of how to word this next one. And this is one that, again, comes in quite frequently, which is, I know that my presets and I know that my groups have the ability to go up to, let's say, 10,000 or so, but I notice that when I scroll down, I only go a certain amount. How would I, let's say, store group 1001? How do I go about that, since I can't see it?
Yeah. Start with a blank screen, and you have to do a little scrolling. So let's say you want group. I like touch screens better. Groups, there we go. Okay. You can use the encoder wheel if you're on a real desk, or I like the page down button. Click it a bunch. It jumps big numbers at a time. You'll notice I get stuck here at 2100. Keep in mind that the pools that all go up to 10,000 take up index space. So if you're only using group 1 through 10, there's no point in us creating an indexable database of 10,000 groups. So if you do need to get to group 5,000, just store a dummy group. Let's say store group 5,000. And it'll index all those groups in between, and now I can keep scrolling. And now I want my pool to start at, say, 4,033. The easiest thing is to drag this down to 1, work your way up to 433, and then drag that back out to the size that you want it to be, and then save that as a view. So I'll save this for the view. And now, every time I go there, it starts with 433. So obviously with the pool that's already big, it does make big jumps. And now you're not able to get 433 at the start. Just drag the window a little smaller and then bring it bigger to get it to start with the number that you want it to start with.
Cool. So, are we planning on doing any webinars on cloning?
Sure. I think that's actually on our list, but I'm not sure where that's fitting in. We have a tendency to pick our topics based on what we've seen the week before. That's the answer to that question.
Oh, I was also going to mention we are thinking about polling you guys as well and asking you what you want to have these webinars on. So by all means, when you're asking us these questions during the webinars, this is a fantastic one, asking us if we're going to be doing cloning, giving us ideas on what to do in the webinars. So by all means, go ahead, ask us, and we'll hopefully get to it in the upcoming weeks.
Yeah, keep in mind that survey you get right after the webinar, we look at it every week, and there's that field where you just put in information. Maybe we didn't think of a good question or something, so fill it out. If a lot of people say cloning, 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 then I guess we'll do a webinar on cloning. And I don't know if you guys realized we extended the webinars this week to fit 45 minutes, so there's about 9 minutes left. So don't hesitate to write some questions if you have them.
Can you go over some of the different store functions?
Different store functions? Oh gosh, what is there, like 276 of them or something? Somebody calculated it once. It was over 200 combinations. If I do this or this or this, it made me laugh. Data source. This is whether you're pulling the data from the programmer. So that means anything with active red background. You could store just the output values. So remember, I talked about the output layer right here. If you want to capture all these values, which could be different than what's in your programmer, you can use output. And if you only want to capture the DMX input, which is coming in via ArtNet or 5-pin DMX input, that could be your data source. Now, when you choose the data source, you have to identify the criteria on what gets stored. So output, if we jump up here, you'll see output has no active information, which means if I try to store something right now, nothing gets stored. I could activate the attributes, and they would be active in the programmer, potentially with a different value than the output, but it would capture the current output value based on that output layer. Another one people do is they say they use all. Now, if you find yourself in a situation where you want to capture the output of only a certain range of fixtures, you can do all for selected. So then that only applies to what's in yellow up here. So I could do all output for what's in yellow. And the other thing people do is they create worlds. If you've never used worlds, it's a great way to limit what you have access to. So I'm going to activate it. I have these selected fixtures. I activated dimmer, position, global color. I will store a world. And now when I go into that world, I only have access to what was active and what was selected at the time I created the world. And then you might use the all, because all only applies to what you have access to in your world. Store look is a really handy one, especially if you're TV or theater, in my opinion. It just captures all attributes necessary to recreate the look that you see on stage. So it says if the dimmer is on, store all attributes. If the dimmer is off, only store the dimmer attribute at 0 so that the other attributes can track from a previous cue. Preset filter applies to the preset pools. If this is off and you store to the color pool, it stores all active information. Generally, I like to leave that on so that when I store to my color pool, it only stores color information. Selective global universal, we covered that in a webinar a couple weeks ago that we're trying to edit so that we can post it. So stay tuned for that. And I'm sure in the future we'll have another webinar on selective global universal. And preset type default, which just follows the preset type associated with the pool, options of the color pool and the dimmer pool, etc. Keep activation is really handy. You'll notice every time you store information to a preset, it deactivates the information. That can slow you down if you're in the middle of rehearsals and trying to store new presets and then store cues. So some people like to leave that on, where we'll do 101 to 112, and in this case, when I store, it deactivates, which means I have to tap the preset before I can store it to a cue. What's sometimes more handy is keep activation. Here it's still active, which means, and it's already referencing the preset, which means I can store preset, store cue in 2 steps rather than store preset, tap preset, store cue. So it saves you a button click, which can amount to a lot of time if you're doing this a lot. And then you have the if not empty pop-up. Is there's already data there, you either overwrite it, merge new data in. Status merge, I forgot. What's it do?
Keeps your track values?
Yes, it activates, it captures the tracked values along with active information. Particularly useful if you have a queue that you really like and you want to tweak some stuff. You go to the queue, change a color, but you want to capture the pan, tilt, and the gobo, etc. You can use status merge. Remove is used to remove values, so you activate what you want to remove and then store remove, and then releases control of that attribute from the queue list. Queue only, tracking shield, I mentioned it earlier, great way to preserve your looks and without having to worry about tracking. And store filter is exactly the same as that filter that we looked at earlier about where I just had dimmer and pan tilt. This says I don't care what's active. It's another way to get around instead of what I talked about earlier. Instead of using worlds, I could select fixture 101 through 112, choose all, set a store filter, and now it's actually only capturing dimmer, pan, and tilt because the filter is, all for selected. So it's only going to store 101 through 112, dimmer, and position because of my store filter. And if you type in help store, store key, it didn't take me to the window I wanted. There's a section in the help manual about the store menu. Do you remember how to get there?
Store pop-up. Store.
Oops. Does this work? Help.
Store dialog.
Store pop-up.
Store options.
Store options.
Store method pop-up. No, that's a different one. All right.
It's in here somewhere.
The help manual is full of way too much information about store.
Any more questions?
In the calculator, what is the difference between remove, release, and off?
That's an easy one. I have some active information here. If I hit clear 3 times, it takes all the active information and it goes away. If instead I just want to remove the tilt, if I want to clear the tilt information or tilt data from the programmer for these 6 fixtures, I select these 6 fixtures, open the calculator, and choose off. So it's effectively a 3 times clear, just for that attribute of the current selection. Remove is how you would remove the data from a queue list, which is better shown with a tracking sheet. So we'll select executor 2. These 3 fixtures, tilted at 50, and I will store that to the queue. Okay, so I've got these 3 fixtures. If I want to remove the tilt information for 103, choose 103, choose remove. It's a remove value, and I store that to Q1, which is on my selected executor. I merge it, and now tilt is gone. So if I wanted to remove a whole fixture from a queue list, I'd say please, please, so everything's active. And instead of using the calculator, I say store Q1 and remove, and it does all attributes because it was all active. I suppose you could do it via the calculator because I'd have the option of removing tilt, removing pan, but changing the tilt value to 100 all in one store method. Did I do that wrong? I did something wrong. Remove. Oh, the value. I gotta do this the other way around. Value. Store Q1. No, I typed it wrong. I'm a failure at programming. There we go. See how the pan went away, the tilt changed to 100%. And then release is how you release control of an attribute. So, store, create second queue. When I go, this tilt value has control. Tilt is tracked. If I don't want this queue list to have control of tilt anymore, say 101, release, and store Q3. And you'll notice it shows up with an R, and when you hit go, this value is released from this queue list and goes back to whoever last had control of it, either another executor or in this case back to default because I have no other executors running. So hopefully that clarifies for you. And
it's also in the help manual as well.
Yep.
Good to read between them and do exactly what Will's doing and
help release.
Store some release, store some remove, and off some values.
Release is the keyword used to enter release values into the programmer. All right.
Release means release. All right.
And with that, you've taken up another 45 minutes of time associated with Gremma 2 software. As always, if you have questions that we didn't get to, email support@aclighting.com. If you want clarification on anything, email support@aclighting.com. When you receive the survey about the Tech Talks today, there's a field where you can type in whatever you want. Please give us your feedback. That's your feedback. Tell us that we were too long, we need more time, there's not enough questions, you want specific topics, etc. We'd love to hear from you.